Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of a Slice of History with the Butterfly Princess. In this week's episode, I'm going to be reading you an interview that Annie Gray did about her latest book that's been released. It's called The Bookshop, the Draper, the Candlestick Maker, a history of the butter, a history of the high street. And this interview was published in the December 2024 edition of the BBC History magazine. Annie Gray is a historian and food historian and author. She's written other books, including The Greedy Queen, Eating with Victoria, and Christmas We Feast, Festive Food Through the Ages. So I'm going to read questions and then I'll read you the answers. So, question one, what can looking at the high street in any given era tell us about that period? This was the answer. So much. If you walk down any high street, you'll see the things that people want and need on an everyday basis. So if you were strolling down the high street in, say, 1903, you'd have sandals and leather workers and specialist shops selling pork and different meat. You'd see a lot of shops selling cloth because ready-to-wear clothing wasn't around then, and you'd encounter lots of items that we simply don't have a role for in our lives today. Tiny little bits of ironmongering, things like that. Alongside the coronation stuff, high streets have always been relatively prestigious areas for leisure shopping, featuring the likes of jewellers, swordsmiths, cloak makers, and lace merchants. Luxury goods such as these are often imported, so they can tell us a lot about Britain's place in global context. Take tea, for example. It was first sold in China shops, then in high-end grocers. Then as it became cheaper everywhere, just following the journey of tea reveals so much about the way in which people interacted with the global landscapes of the time. Next question. When did a cluster of shops that we might recognise as a high street first appear in British towns? The evolution of the high street was a really gradual process. The market was still the most important place to shop. Certainly for the working classes well into the 20th century, market day was always the busiest day in town. But between 1650 and 1750, most towns in Britain began to have some fixed shops, usually around or leading from the markets. One of the first types of shop to move into fixed premises was the butcher. That kept meats away from the main shopping area and enabled butchers to lock up stock and install cold stores. Traditionally, the market square was also a gathering place, somewhere people went to enjoy entertainment, jeer at criminals in the shops, or to hear political proclamations. Slowly, these aspects became features of the high street too. It was where you'd find sex workers, beggars, people ranting on street corners, hustlers drumming up custom for the bear fight being held the next day, that kind of thing. In my book, I argue that the high street isn't just about shops, it's a place for the community to come together. Next question. What items have been enduring staples of the high street? The most significant products sold have been clothing and food, but the way these things are sold have changed hugely. In 1700, a typical grocer would offer raisins, dried ginger, and spices, but it would also sell you a couple of nails and maybe a bit of cloth as well. Gradually, though, shops became more and more specialised. In the 19th century, high-end grocers emerged, calling themselves Italian warehouses. They sold Italian products such as olive oil and jars of preserves, but also the name just sounded more exotic. More exotic. Then in the second half of the 19th century, chain grocers such as Limpton's, the Maple Dairy and home of Colonel was established to serve the lower end of the markets. When the first Sainsbury's shop opened in Drury Lane, London in 1869, it sold only eggs, milk and butter. There was a lot of money to be made in these early chain grocers, many of which sold just a small range of products. By the post-war period, multiple chain grocers were opening, including Sainsbury's, Tesco's and Waitrose, all expanding their offerings on high streets. Then Britain saw the rise of the out-of-town supermarket, which is modelled on the Marcus Homer supersized, and the start of a move away from food shopping on the high street. Question: what are some of the most interesting high street shops now lost to time? Answer: the fabric shop is a fascinating example of something that has all but disappeared. The story of clothing on the high street began with the sale of cloth. The cut cloth, then almost ready to wear, then finally truly ready to wear clothing. The final step didn't really happen until the 20th century. Even when I was growing up in the 80s, there was a popular chain of fabric shops called Gordon Thornday. I remember my mum spending hours in one just within my lifetime. Fabric shops have virtually vanished from the high streets, apart from some very small independent outlets. I think that if you told someone from 160 years ago, or even 60 years ago, that today we all buy off the peg clothes in randomly assigned sizes, they would have been flabbergasted. There was also a level of real specialism on the high street that I think we've now lost. You might have a lawnmower shop next door to a piano shop next door to the oil man who sold oil paints and different types of oils for cooking or fuel. It's very rare to find really specialist shops anymore, especially given modern rent pressures. That said, one of the success stories of the past few years is the bookshop. Booksellers have always been prevalent, and in the early... Yeah. And in the early days of the high street, they were a mark of a well-appointed town. People would stroll past to look at the prints in the windows, each one displayed in its own pane of glass. In the past, booksellers were usually printers too. Instead, inside you could tell them which book or collection of poems or sermons you'd like, and then you would choose your own bargain. Some booksellers would also operate as circulating libraries. They were quite relaxed, exclusive spaces where you could sit and browse. Leisure was very much built into the whole experience. And the bookshops embrace the idea of shopping as pleasure to really lean into. Question: when did shopping become seen as a leisure activity rather than just another chore? Answer: It always has been to some extent. Even before the 17th century, if you were wealthy, you would delegate the task of going to the market, but you might still go along to a selling fair. A lot of those still exist in a changed form. Think of the Goose Fair in Nottingham or the Midsummer Fair in Cambridge. Today, these are big entertainment events with roller coasters and candy plots. But when founded, they were international selling fairs. They would last up to a week, and you would spend a lot of time discussing possible purchases which would be bought out and spread before you to inspect. You might even have salespeople come to your home. The idea that you would go out to spend a day just having fun shopping in town really took off in the late 17th and early 18th century, and it caused a lot of concern at the time. Many people hated the idea of browsing, a notion that unsurprisingly was widely associated with women. Quite clearly, men were just as guilty, but women were the ones who took the flak. It was known as tumbling in reference to when women who would grab a bolt of cloth, tumbling the fabric all over the place without buying anything. Shoppers were seen as a game into which you entered with whoever was selling. Most places didn't have fixed prices until the mid-18th century, so you needed to bargain. Trying to get a good price to get the better of the shopkeeper, as it were, was treated as a kind of intellectual exercise. Question. Napoleon supposedly called Britain a nation of shopkeepers. How have shopkeepers been regarded over time? For much of history, shopkeepers were not, this is the answer, for much of history, shopkeepers were not regarded as society's most upstanding members. If you go back to the medieval period, there was a really strong idea that you should shop directly from the producer, often a farmer, which all sounds very, very idyllic and organic. And even in the Middle Ages, there were people buying stuff from producers, then selling it on. Such sellers were widely hated, considered immoral and profiteering. Gradually, though, people began to realise that producers aren't necessarily very good at selling, and that maybe people who are really good at making cheese should just make really good cheese well, especially salesperson perhaps with a network of agents should sell that cheese. People came to appreciate that there were maybe a bit of a profiting on selling. These profits ultimately find their way into the system, so it's quite good for the economy overall. Next question. What can you tell us about the rise of the department store? The concept of it is not actually very old. It was only from the 1860s onwards that the big shop, a brilliant descriptive term, may emerge on the high street. Such establishments weren't called department stores at the time. That term did not start to be used. It was a productive Americanism for something that was seen as a bit shabby and down market. A lot of the early big shops evolved out of the most specialist shops that just started selling additional items. For example, Mercer's originally sold only silk, but then Mercer's became Drapers. Then the Drapers also started to sell furniture, then carpets and clothes and homewares. They might move into ready-to-wear. They might move into ready-to-wear and add some toys and perhaps an entire house fitting service. Then before you know it, you had yourself a big shop. A lot of the early big shops extended into adjacent premises, ending up with a real mishmash of buildings. When department stores became established, though, They often sported glorious big columns, huge atriums with multiple floors and massive windows. Many department stores also had staff quarters on the top floor because the shop assistants would live in. The idea of the window display was really driven by department stores. Selfridges displayed a manor plane, and Lewis's of Liverpool placed a hand excluded from Pompeii in its window. Another innovative sales technique by department stores was the big marketing stunt. Gordon Selfridge, very brash, very American, was very well known for this. He thought British high streets were incredibly backward and even had the law changed in order to build his massive store on Oxford Street. But the golden age of the big department store was the interwar period. Benny's in Kingston upon Thames was great at such affairs. When the first Hoover was launched, a giant Hoover was installed in its atrium. On another occasion, it had a Swedish diver plunge from into a tiny swimming pool 5 stories below. The floor had to be reinforced because of the vicinity with which he had hit the pool. And alarmingly, she lost her swimming costume on the way down. Other stores would hold cookery demonstrations and catwalk shows were common right up until the 1970s. It was all about bringing people in through the door, making the department store a hub for more than just shopping. Question: what refreshments were on offer for hungry shoppers? As they are today, refreshments have always been a huge part of the high street experience. In the modern context, I'm not fond of a chain cafe, but it's important to acknowledge that early examples were crucial to the development of the high street. Take Lockhart's Cafe Cocoa Rooms. Cocoa was traditionally associated with industrial living, workhouses, hospitals, and Lockhart was squarely aimed at the poor. You could bring your own food and sit in one all day, so I think they deserve an honourable mention. Some street sellers offered from the past are really interesting too. Things such as sour. Very few people in Britain today have heard of sour, but it's still a popular drink in the Middle East, where it is now commonly called sour. Made from powdered orchid roots, it's a pick-me-up and was frequently served on street corners in 18th century Britain. What debates about high streets have raged on from the centuries? People have always been concerned about the high streets. First of all, they were worried that shopping was immoral and that everyone would waste their hard-earned money. Then when shops became more established and we all realised that we loved them, concerns drifted to the issue of small shopkeepers being driven out of businesses for big shops. People have been arguing over that since at least the 1850s. In the early 20th century, the debate focused on the death of the grocer. The idea that the small-scale specialist grocers would be forced under by big shops, with food halls and unskilled workers. That took a lot longer than people at the time thought it would be. The class aspect where the high street is being graffitied on is in slow decline. Has long been a topic of debate. Ethnically too, there are many choices to make when shopping, because another argument that has raged forever concerns the treatment of producers. There was a huge boycott of slave-produced sugar from the 18th century, while in the 1890s, people were concerned about dressmakers being worked to the bone. We still have debates today about working conditions and modern slavery, in terms of how our products are made. So thanks everyone. That concludes this week's edition of A Slice of History with the Butterfly Princess. Thanks for tuning in. See you again soon.